Hi, it's Susan Shea, and I'm submitting this video as part of the application process for the VP of People and Culture with ATB. And I'd say good morning or good afternoon, but I don't know what time it is when you're actually going to be watching this. I can tell you it's 6:30 for me. Everybody's asleep in the house, so I'm hiding out in my office, as you can see, my home office. Um, but that's kind of a reflection of part of who I am. I'm an early morning person and typically up at before the sun rises. Anyways, I'll get right to it. So there were three questions that you asked as part of this application process. One of them was about building vision. First question. And what does being a visionary HR person mean to me? And really, what it means to me is keeping abreast of emerging trends, technologies, disruptive process and technologies, and really rethinking how we do things on a regular basis. And it doesn't mean adopting all of the things that are out there that may be trendy, because some of them may be very short-lived. But it does mean staying abreast and understanding what's coming up in the marketplace that may impact people and culture, and how that may bring value to a business. So, as an example, I've done a number of different speaking engagements. I've spoken at Disrupt HR quite a number of times. I've spoken at Women in Leadership programs and Royal Roads University in Victoria. And for one of the Disrupt talks that I did, I talked about how virtual reality was up and coming in for human resources and the use of human resources, and mainly in areas such as learning. And I think we can all get our minds around what that means in terms of using virtual reality to help drive a learning strategy. But I've also talked about it in some areas, other areas that may not be as obvious. So, for example, orientation. So when you're thinking about bringing somebody on to a company, and if you're a large company with multiple different locations, using virtual reality through the orientation process can really make an employee feel as though they're right there with you, learning and understanding the company, going out to job sites and seeing what takes place, and really being able to be immersed in the business very quickly, their first, second, third day. And also another usage that I've talked about is virtual reality and how it builds empathy. And when you think about human resources and you think about what makes a culture sticky, that use of empathy is quite significant. And virtual reality has a means of being able to do that and bring organizations together collectively. And so if you drive a very significant, and I believe ATB does, social responsibility platform, that virtual reality and empathy and connection to your social responsibility initiatives becomes very key in terms of how you engage employees. So that's one example. Another example is something that we started using at Burnco, which is called Rejobify. And Rejobify is a way to better reject a candidate through the application process, because nobody likes to be rejected. And if you can leave them feeling good about their engagement in the process, whether or not they got to an interview stage or whether or not they were stopped right at the resume point, because for whatever reason, maybe their resume didn't meet the minimum requirements of the job. A tool called Rejobify helps us to reach out to those candidates and provide them with other tools that can help them in their continued job search. And we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from candidates that have gone through that process and been given those tools. There's no cost to them. But one of the other reasons that we decided to use it was because we wanted to really think about potential, our applicants as potential customers at Burnco. And how do we connect in with those folks? Because we probably get 9,000 applications a year. And all of those 9,000 applicants are potential customers of Burnco. And so we wanted to make sure that we were being respectful to them through that application process. And we were making that rejection, which can be very hard to take, a little bit easier. In addition, we wanted to see whether or not we could try and convert some of those applicants into potential customers by offering them discounts to Burnco product and services as a thank you for going through taking the time to apply to Burnco. So those are a couple of examples that I bring forward. So the second question that you asked was on business leadership and how have I helped organizations leverage their human capital. So I'm going to give you an example from when I was the Vice President of Human Resources with Focus Corporation. So when I started there, we had a 38% turnover rate. And anybody who's got a significant turnover rate like that knows that you can't recruit your way out of it. You simply can't. You can't hire enough people, especially if you're dealing with very niche talent sets, which in Focus we were. We were an engineering company, a geomatics company, and those are not skill sets that are easy to find in the marketplace. So we could have spent a whole lot of time trying to refine the talent acquisition process. And we did do some refinement in that space, but really what we had to do was approach it from a different angle and figure out why we were having such an enormous turnover and spend our time understanding why people left, but more importantly, why people were staying, and try and fix the reasons for why they were leaving and enhance the reasons for why they wanted to stay. And we did that, and within a 2-year period, we were actually able to get the turnover rate down from 38% to 13%. And if anybody's dealt with that kind of turnover, you know that there isn't a silver bullet for it. Everybody wants a silver bullet, but unfortunately there isn't one. And there's a number of reasons why you have significant turnover like that. And some of it we found at Focus was very much in line with what studies will tell you, in that employees are leaving their leaders. And we had some very toxic leaders that we needed to replace. And we had some good leaders that needed to have their competencies elevated. And so we needed to tackle this from a multi-pronged perspective. Some of it was about learning, leadership development. Some of it was about understanding engagement of employees. So when you're running a consulting organization like Focus was, we were 2,000 employees. But largely on the consulting side, engineering consulting, they needed to understand where their next job was, because without having strong communication and without understanding the vision and direction of the business and without understanding what kind of wins we were having in the marketplace, they weren't seeing the longevity of their time at the company. And so they were jumping ship for the next opportunity. So we had to fix some of those problems as well. One of the other things that we did was we had our engineering group, one of our engineering groups, they were struggling to find talent in remote markets. And one of the things that we had to help them understand was that you can't just keep replicating a full office in every market that you go into, because it's not reasonable to think that you're going to be able to find the kind of talent that you need to reside in those remote markets. And so what we did was we worked together with the business to put together a model that saw a shared services center within very key strategic areas that could then service the work to some of those remote markets and use some collaborative tools to be able to do it. And that proved to be very successful, because we struggled to find engineers who wanted to go live in Peace River, for example. And if you've ever been up to Peace River, you'd know that even if we found the talents that we were looking for, there wasn't housing, there wasn't infrastructure, there wasn't the draw to the community that would lend itself to helping us sell an opportunity in that kind of a remote market. And so we needed to look at a hub like in Grand Prairie that was a short flight away to some of our more remote markets, and we could set up a shared services model within there to help with things like drafting and other pieces of the engineering work that didn't need to be delivered necessarily locally. So those are a couple of things that we did. But really what we focused on was looking at what I've termed to be the 9 C's of culture. And that's collaboration, camaraderie, community, continuous learning, control. And when I say control, it's about not being controlling, but it's about helping employees understand that they have accountability, authority, and responsibility. And that's something that employees want to have. Nobody wants to have responsibility without having accountability. And so that's really what the control piece is about. Communication, caring, consistency. Employees want to know that things are not always equal or the same, but there is consistency in how they're being treated. And last but certainly not least was celebration. So if you'd, and we did something at Focus in every single one of those branches, and at Burnco we're working through a culture plan right now, utilizing that 9C methodology and looking at every single one of them. And are we touching every single one of them? Because those are things that are quite important to employees. So if you'd like to learn more about the 9 C's, you'll have to get me in for another interview, for an in-person interview. The final question that you asked was on team leadership. And one part of it was, what was my greatest accomplishment as a people leader? And I'm actually going to read something to you because I did what I think all good leaders do. I struggled a little bit to be able to answer the question without. It was challenging for me. So I did. I reached out to a couple of the folks that have worked with me before, and asked them, what did they think of my leadership? And I got one of the ladies responded back, and I'm just going to read that to you. She said, I was given a platform to succeed. And as the manager of talent acquisition for Focus, she believed I gave her the opportunity and leverage to create something from scratch and to build her team, saying that I was there to support her and remove obstacles, but I let her realize her vision. She closed by saying that I make her believe that she can achieve anything she sets her mind to. And I was quite touched by that response. The other part of the question that you asked was, what was one of my greatest learning moments? And I would say a learning moment for me was when I started to formally study change management. So I'm certified and trained in ProSci and ADCAR methodologies. And when I started to really understand how people accept change, adapt to change, have a need to celebrate the past as they're envisioning the future, it really changed my leadership style in terms of how to create those win-win situations. So one of the biggest projects that I worked on as an independent contractor, which I did for a number of years while my kids were little, and I needed greater flexibility in my time. So one of the major projects I did was with Worley Parsons Canada, and I was actually hired by the finance group, not by the HR group, because they wanted to redefine how they delivered service within finance. So they'd done a number of acquisitions, and throughout the acquisitions, they really hadn't brought the team together, nor had they looked at the service level or the skill sets required to be able to deliver to an organization as large as Worley Parsons Canada. So we had probably, I think it was about 3,000 employees or so across Canada. Worley Parsons Global had about 30,000 employees. But it was still a cobbled together, particularly in Canada, it was a cobbling together of multiple acquisitions where they hadn't done a real review of talent, nor had they mapped that back to a strategy. And so my role there was about a year-long project. So my role there was to help work with the CFO, work with the corporate controller to help them build that vision of what they wanted from finance and what they needed to deliver. We created a triangle of accountability because in an engineering consulting organization, there's a lot of dotted line reporting relationships, and who your performance manager is may not be who your project manager is at any given time, and you need to have that performance connected. And so we developed initially a triangle to help the business understand that it's not about a linear reporting relationship, it's about an accountability model. And so there's someone that needs to be accountable for the career development piece. There's somebody that needs to be accountable for the governance, because when you do an acquisition of a private company and you roll it into a publicly traded company, there's a whole different governance that's required from the finance team in terms of reporting. And then there's a day-to-day component that is driven more by the business and what the business needs. And really that's the role of a financial analyst who works closely with the business to help them understand where their contract leakage is, where they're making money, where they're not making money, to help drive that decision making from a financial perspective. And so we created that model. And from that model, we created a service delivery model that we then rolled out to the executive team. And what I learned through that process and through my studies on the change management side was you really needed to build the business case for change and take people along the journey. Because if you just go from 0 to 100 and they haven't been along on the journey, they don't understand why you've come to some of the decisions that you have. And that doesn't mean you have to get, you don't have to overly collaborate to such a point where you're blocked from moving forward. But it does mean that you've got to be communicating regularly and knowing when to collaborate, when to consult, and when to inform. Those are different things, and knowing when you're doing which specific activities was key. And so we did bring them along in the journey, and as a result of that, created the service delivery model, which we then turned into an organizational structure, which we then turned into a talent map to see how the people actually mapped back to the skill sets we recognized that we needed as part of that organizational structure, which then supported the service delivery and the strategy. And so from that, we created some things like a shared services model on payroll, on billing, on accounts payable, on some different things like that that were quite dispersed throughout the business at the time. And we really learned a lot about the people. And I would say one of the biggest things for the finance leadership team was those regular conversations about the talent that they actually already had, and being able to tap into that talent and tap into people's passions and say, look, I know you're in what's probably a more traditional bookkeeping type of role today because of where you came from through the acquisition, but your passion seems to be here, and we have a role actually for that if you're interested. And so we were able to really work with the team, the broader extended finance team, to understand their skill sets, understand their passions, and as best we could map them back to the structure that we were trying to implement. And I would say that the project was so successful, in fact, that the global organization, the Global Worley Parsons, took notice of it and adopted our strategy and our service delivery model, and implemented it from a global perspective. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, or at least a little part of me. So hopefully that helps give you some better insight into who I am. And I look forward to continuing on this journey with ATB. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.